even while I was in Arkansas.
His attorneys didn't call any witnesses.
Los abogados no llamaron a ningún testigo.
You want to say anything to the family?
My cell phone, I stayed in contact with this detective. And so he knew where I was the whole time. He got a lot of the facts wrong. He listed information in that report that aren't true. I worked as a loan officer for a mortgage company, and I evaluated borrowers' potential to determine whether or not they qualified for a home loan. There's evidence at the crime scene that they found, trace, hair, and fiber evidence, but they never tested any of it.
Number 4, Romeo Sal Holt. Romeo Holt simply said no when asked whether he had anything to say before his capital sentence was formally imposed. Holt, 31 years old, of Harrison, Allegheny County, officially became the 133rd person on Pennsylvania's end row when he was condemned to his end by lethal injection for fatally shooting New Kensington police officer Brian Shaw in November 2017. A Westmoreland County jury following a 2-week trial convicted Holt of the first-degree charge and 2 other offenses in connection with the fatal shooting in New Kensington. The jury also determined Holt should be sentenced to his end. Prosecutors said Shaw chased Holt as he fled from a car after a traffic stop. The officer was fatally shot during the pursuit. Common Pleas Judge Rita Hathaway said he was a model police officer in the community. This family lost him. The community lost him that day. Holt did not testify during his trial or the subsequent penalty phase. He continued his silence till the end of the trial. Shaw's surviving family members and friends sat quietly in court and did not testify during the sentencing hearing. They were not available for comment afterward. Defense attorney Tim Dawson said Holt would appeal his conviction and sentence. Dawson said,
"You're going to be in Westmoreland County, that's mostly a rural area. Conservatives are typically prosecutorial, pro-prosecution. Poor young kid was doing his job and protecting all of us, and I think it'll be treated as such."
Anything you want to say to the officer's family?
For the defendant to turn around and do what he allegedly did is outrageous. As we know, rural areas are typically conservative. When it ultimately comes to deliberate and them to go home knowing they voted to put a young man to death.
He was surprisingly upbeat for a man who was just convicted and sentenced to his end. He knows he has a long road ahead of him. In addition to the penalty, Hathaway imposed 2 consecutive sentences that require Holt to serve 10.5 to 27 years in prison for convictions on 2 firearms charges. As a convicted felon, Holt was not permitted to possess the gun he used to slay Shaw, according to prosecutors. Hathaway recounted Holt's lengthy criminal record that dates back to when he was 16. He was convicted as a juvenile in connection with multiple arrests for gun possession and giving false identification to police. Holt was convicted of another firearms offense when he was 19 and was convicted of the simple charge and disorderly conduct and sentenced to probation at age 22. A year later, Hathaway said he was convicted of another weapons offense and sentenced to 2 to 4 years in prison. She said the circumstances that led up to Shaw's slaying were a direct result of the previous convictions. Prosecutors argued at trial that Holt was in possession of a gun while riding as a passenger in the vehicle Shaw attempted to stop. Had he been found with the gun during a search of the vehicle, Holt could have faced a parole revocation that might have resulted in a prison sentence of up to 5 years. Number 3, Andre Thomas. Andre Lee Thomas is an American convicted assassin and end-row inmate known for removing both of his eyeballs in separate incidences and ingesting one of them. In 2004, Thomas slaughtered his estranged wife Laura Boren, his 4-year-old son, and her 1-year-old daughter in Sherman, Texas. He cut open the chests of all 3 victims, and he removed the 2 children's hearts. Thomas, whose mental health problems began with auditory hallucinations at about age 10, was in the 9th grade when Boren became pregnant with his child. They married when Thomas was 18, but they separated soon thereafter. In the weeks leading up to the slayings, Thomas had suicidal thoughts, drank heavily, and used cold medication as a recreational drug. In jail a few days after his arrest, Thomas pulled one of his eyes out of its socket. A jury rejected his insanity defense and sentenced him to his end on a capital slaying conviction. In 2008, he removed his other eye and ingested it. Thomas was diagnosed with schizophrenia after his arrest, and his case has raised ethical questions about executing the mentally ill. His trial verdict was upheld by a state criminal appeals court in 2008 and by a federal appeals court in 2021. While he is still under a fatal sentence, Thomas is housed in a Texas prison facility for inmates with psychiatric problems. A Grayson County district judge withdrew an April 5 punishment date, which was approaching quickly for Andre Thomas to allow his legal team time to prepare a case proving the blind 39-year-old is too incompetent to be exterminated by the state. He's still on the row, and there's no telling if he will be spared capital punishment. Number 2, Louis Gaskin. A Florida inmate dubbed the Ninja Slayer for having dressed all in black when attacking random couples is set to be fatally punished in April. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed an end warrant for Louis Bernard Gaskin, who will be the second person fatally punished in the state this year, as scheduled on April 12. Gaskin, now 56, carried out a series of heinous attacks on couples in December 1989, including one that ended in the end of a husband and wife. Gaskin, dressed all in black, went randomly searching for victims at night. He first encountered the home of Robert and Georgette Sturmfels, who were lounging in the living room of their secluded Palm Coast home at the time. Gaskin, who lived in Bunnell, about 20 minutes away, stood outside the house, pointed his .22 caliber rifle at it, and opened fire.
But he didn't have any feelings for those victims that he murdered or their families that were left behind.
If Holt is convicted and if the death penalty is sought, there's a good likelihood it will be granted.
I think he should die for what he did.
On the charges of first-degree murder, there's no bond on either of those charges.
I just can't imagine that anyone would kill another person with robbery as the motive.
For his 2 victims that he murdered, and so, he's getting justice, and he may not like it.
Request by Gaskin's lawyers today for a hearing on his mental condition. A request to vacate the death sentence was also rejected.
Gaskin ended up shooting 56-year-old Robert Sturmfels multiple times, then struck 55-year-old Georgette Sturmfel as she fled from the room. Gaskin followed up the carnage by entering the home, where he slaughtered each victim at point-blank range, according to filings. Before he left, Gaskin grabbed jewelry, cash, video recorders, a clock, and lamps, some of them Christmas gifts that would eventually help doom him. But the night of violence wasn't over yet. After slaying the Sturmfels, Gaskin made his way to the home of Joseph and Mary Rector. Gaskin cut the couple's phone line and threw items onto their roof in an apparent attempt to get them to come out of their home. The pair emerged, and Gaskin shot Joseph Rector once, but the couple was able to make it to their nearby car and escape, driving to a hospital, even as Gaskin shot at their car, according to reports. Joseph Rector narrowly survived the attack. His wife was unhurt. Gaskin was nabbed after an informant stepped forward and told authorities he had the rifle used in the shootings. The man, whose sister was dating Gaskin at the time, added that the assassin had all but confessed to him. The man told authorities that Gaskin had saved some of that stuff to give to his girlfriend for Christmas after having jacked the gifts and had left the victims stiff. Gaskin told a psychologist, "The guilt will always be there. The devil had more of a hold than God did, and I knew that I was wrong. I wasn't insane." Gaskin was eventually convicted of slaying and attempted slaying in the shootings. Gaskin appealed his sentence several times, but the state and U.S. Supreme Courts rejected the attempts. Number 1, Ivan Cantu. Ivan Cantu punishment is scheduled at 6 p.m. local time on Wednesday, April 26, 2023, inside the Walls Unit Chamber at the Huntsville State Penitentiary in Texas. 49-year-old Ivan is convicted of slaying 27-year-old James Mosqueda and 21-year-old Amy Kitchens on November 4, 2000 in Dallas, Texas. For the last 21 years, Ivan has resided on End Row in Texas. Ivan Abner Cantu graduated from high school and did not have any prior convictions. Ivan had previously worked as a laborer. In 1998 or 99, Ivan was hired by his cousin James Mosqueda to work in James's mortgage banking business in Dallas. James eventually fired Ivan in mid-2000. Ivan Cantu moved into an apartment with his girlfriend and her brother on October 15, 2000. The apartment was located about 1 mile from where James lived. In late October, Cantu informed one of his roommates that he was going to destroy his cousin James. Cantu alleged that James was a part-time drug dealer of cocaine and marijuana. Cantu also planned to steal James's money. On November 4, 2000, Cantu left his apartment around 11:30 p.m. in his vehicle. Shortly before leaving, Cantu told his girlfriend he was going to destroy James. Cantu returned to the apartment about 2 hours later, covered in blood. His face was also swollen. James lived with his fiancée Amy Kitchen. On November 4, 2000, at the request of Amy's mother, the Dallas Fire Department forcibly entered James and Amy's home. James and Amy were found deceased in the bedroom, with no sign of struggle. They had been slain by multiple gunshot wounds. Police quickly narrowed in on Cantu as a suspect. A search of his apartment a few days later revealed that he had a key to James's home. He also had in his possession keys to Amy's vehicle. Further, police found clothes in the garbage that had blood on them. DNA testing revealed that the blood matched James and Amy.
He claimed that I gave him my cousin's Corvette key that day. He would have given it to the prosecution. They would have entered it as evidence and they would have used it against me. They did not do that. Even then, I stayed in contact with the lead detective, who was Detective Wynn. During that time, when his body was discovered, I was already en route or near my ex-girlfriend's home in Arkansas. But I mean, as far as my childhood, I had a good childhood. There's evidence at the crime scene that they found, trace, hair, and fiber evidence, but they never tested any of it.
Eventually, police also located the slaying weapon at Cantu's ex-girlfriend's apartment. Cantu was arrested, charged, and convicted of the robbery and slaying of James and Amy. Cantu alleged that rival drug dealers were responsible for the couple's slaying. He previously had a date in 2011. That date was stayed to allow additional DNA testing. Matt Duff, the host and private investigator on the podcast Cousins by Blood, has spent years diving into the case and has compiled a strong argument that suggests Cantu could have been framed and has spent the past 20 years rotting in a prison cell at the Pulaski unit in Texas for a crime he did not commit. The podcast shows that the defense called 0 witnesses during the guilt and innocence phase and presented no exculpatory evidence. Since 2000, Cantu has maintained his innocence and requested an investigation into the case and DNA testing to help his case. The request was denied in the Texas Appeal Court.
I was arrested on November 8th, but prior to that, my cousin's body was discovered on the 4th. I offered, any information or anything I could do to help the possible suspects that might have been responsible for his murder. On that day, they immediately arrested me. He got a lot of the facts wrong. He listed information in that report that aren't true, which was a lie. I never did anything like that. And if I would have done that, he would have used that.
That's all for the video today. See you next time.